So, here is the explanation of the sublime. The sublime is in a way a new definition of beauty and not in the traditional way that we expected. So this idea of sublime is often represented in paintings and also in the description of a landscape. And this is something which is not harmonious, something which is overwhelming, this idea of too much, and which as a consequence is terrifying, but it is not something beautiful as we could have expected. So next column, so about the atmosphere. So and it's obviously an atmosphere of mystery that we could find in detective story, but there is something more. There is the creation or this idea of fear, which is everywhere in the book. This idea of anxiety, this idea of terror, horror, and also excitement. So we can move directly to the next column, so the effect on the reader. This idea of effect is really a physical effect and an emotional response to the book. It's not a genre which is supposed to teach or to have a lesson at the end or to instruct in a very formal way, but it's a genre which needs to trigger an emotional and physical reaction from the reader. And so here I added some expression which are interesting and which really sum up the feelings that you can have when you read a book or when you a gothic book or when you watch a film in this genre. So this idea of chilling the blood, okay, this idea that there's a paradox at the core of the reaction of the reader. There is first an impression of repugnance and recoil. Recoil is it's similar to repugnance, but it's really this idea of sudden disgust, sudden fear and horror, which is brought to the characters because of a specific event. So at first, the reader seems to be disgusted by this, to feel disgust, but at the same time, this disgust is fascinating him and attracting him to the book and to be plunged into the book. So another expression, so give the creep, so it's the same idea, chilling the blood, so expressing a really physical reaction, and your body is involved in this reading. It makes people uneasy, uncomfortable. It can be nerve-wracking, so playing on your nerve with this idea of suspense and fear, and this idea of thrilling that we can find in thriller. And a new expression which is quite funny is this idea that a gothic book, is usually taking you on the edge of your seat, meaning that you can't, you're almost falling from your seat because you are plunged into this reading. So, does the Gothic fiction have an aim? So we said that it was not supposed to instruct, it was not supposed to teach a lesson to the reader, but we can see that there are some messages depending on the type of Gothic book that you're reading. So the Gothic fiction represents the internal and external threats through the image of the supernatural elements. So they represent them. Usually in other books they are kept silent. So the Gothic genre is explicitly representing these threats, which were taboo, and it's a way to warn the people against this threat. They represent the transgression through the exaggeration, and by representing it, they represent the threat that can endanger the society or the people. So representing these threats is in a way, it's a means to reassert the values and the necessity of the values of the society and the necessity of the limits, because the reader who was reading these books at the origin could see the dangers that were caused by infringing the limits, by infringing the rules, and by in a way yielding to the threats and to the internal and inner desires. So moreover, you've got so in the video the man explains that there are two types of Gothic books. You've got a type of Gothic books where the author wants you to believe in the supernatural elements, and another type of book where the supernatural elements are explained in a rational and natural way. It means that these supernatural elements, events, can be explained by rational arguments, because they represent in a way the inner desire, inner threats, inner instincts that are in these books, explicitly expressed and visualized and represented. So it's a way to explain that there's no supernatural force, but what you have to understand is that the supernatural in a way, or the threats, are within yourself. If you take your text, so it's what is underlined in blue. So this idea of by representing the threats, the authors wanted to warn of the dangers of social and moral transgression, to be able to reassert the values of the society. So it's a way to prevent infringing the limits that the society has set. I forgot to tell you that in pink, so that was the previous column, you had the elements referring to the reaction of the reader. So you'll find the document attached to the mail, so you can compare the video and this document. So to conclude, so we're going to watch some examples of cover pages of very famous books. So Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I don't know if you have seen the film, but there was a film, I think last year or 2 years ago, about Mary Shelley and how she created this book and it was she was a woman, so it's quite interesting, all this idea of the repression of the society that forced her to write something about the Gothic. So in these different covers, you can see some elements of the Gothic. So here you've got the main character, and the main character, we don't know if he's human, not human, a robot, a monster. So you've got this feeling of uncanny coming from this mix of two elements that we're not sure of, and so a character which seemed to be a character from supernatural character, or at least not human. The same here. So you've got a character which is both human and who is both human and a skeleton or a corpse, so we don't know if he's living or not, so this idea of uncanny. You've got also the setting, which is really dark, which is wild, and which is completely desolate. It's the same here with the cover page of Dracula. You've got a castle, so the emblematic and symbolic place of the Gothic genre. This place is totally desolate with no human presence and extremely dark also because it seems to be set at night. And Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, so you've got this idea of double that we talked about between the opposition between the scientist and the madman. And here the Phantom of the Opera, so we can see that there is a woman who has fainted, so representing the weakness and fragility, vulnerability of the women, so as they are represented in these books. So this is it. It was a long class. I hope it's clear and that you have understood the codes of the Gothic because it's important to understand the short story that we are going to study, and it's also important to be able to identify these codes in the short story or in books or in films, and to also understand how these codes can be changed, can be distorted, and to create a new form and a modern version of the Gothic. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.